Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us today. We're pointing our lens at a massive global trend that has been, absolutely dominating headlines lately.
It really has been everywhere.
Right. But we are going to look at it from an entirely different, highly structural perspective today. So if you follow global news, you're more than familiar with the sheer panic surrounding falling birth rates.
Oh, absolutely. The narrative is always exactly the same.
Yeah, that younger generations have just, lost the desire to become parents, that we're in the middle of this mysterious, highly individualized cultural shift where people are just unilaterally opting out of family life.
Right. Like it's just a sudden change in personal preferences.
Exactly. But what if that conventional wisdom is looking at the symptom and just completely misdiagnosing the disease?
Yeah.
What if a country's plunging fertility rate isn't actually about a lack of desire for children at all?
Right. What if it's intrinsically tied to the price of bricks, mortar, and a fundamental collapse in national confidence?
Yes. Because when we stop treating demographic contraction as an isolated cultural mystery and start recognizing it as the direct downstream result of severe economic realities.
The entire conversation shifts. I mean, it forces a total reevaluation of how we measure societal health.
It really does.
We move away from that rather patronizing question of, why don't people want families? And we start interrogating the institutional frameworks. We have to ask, why do our current economic structures make building a family feel like a financial impossibility?
And to really get into the mechanics of this, we're pulling from a remarkably dense, insightful policy article. It's from March 2026, published by Jamaica Homes News.
Yeah, it's titled Jamaica's Demographic Turning Point.
Right, and it covers fertility decline, housing systems, migration dynamics, and the institutional preconditions for national confidence. It is a fantastic read.
It's incredibly thorough.
So our mission on this deep dive is to guide you past that surface-level panic. We're going to map out the hidden but very real structural connections between plummeting fertility rates, an increasingly hostile housing market, global migration, and a widening opportunity gap.
And, Jamaica presents an incredibly rich, concentrated case study for this dynamic.
It really does.
The data points coming out of the country are stark, but the underlying mechanism...
The friction between domestic wages and globalized real estate.
Exactly, and modern labor expectations. Those are deeply relevant to almost any modernizing economy you can point to right now.
Okay, so let's ground this in the hard numbers first, just to set the baseline. If you look at the 2022 population and housing census, Jamaica's population is sitting at roughly 2.77 million.
Right.
But the critical data point, the one that really sets off the alarms, is that the total fertility rate has dropped well below the 2.1 children per woman necessary for basic population replacement.
Which means we are looking at a population on a definitive path to contraction.
Yeah. And the immediate reaction from commentators is often to treat a statistic like that as just an anomaly or a sudden crisis demanding some, superficial quick fix policy.
Which is a mistake. A demographic shift of this velocity and magnitude is one of the most crucial structural signals a country can produce.
Because it's a mirror.
Exactly. Demographics operate as a highly accurate mirror. They reflect the aggregate of a society's broader institutional realities.
Right.
A birth rate is, in many ways, a metric of societal optimism. It shows us exactly how confident the working-age population feels about their long-term future.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to fully grasp the severity of this contraction, we have to establish what the historical baseline actually was.
How things used to be.
Right. For the vast majority of the 20th century, the standard in Jamaica, particularly outside the urban centers, was the large multi-generational household.
It was the norm.
Having a significant number of children wasn't categorized as this overwhelming financial burden that required decades of intense financial planning. It was just seamlessly integrated into the social and economic fabric of daily life.
And that integration was possible because the underlying structural conditions actively supported and rewarded it.
Right, there were actual structural pillars.
Yes, 4 distinct pillars sustained those large families. First, and perhaps most importantly, you had robust family land systems.
Which meant multiple generations could legally and practically build dwellings on a single piece of inherited property.
Exactly. That completely alters the initial capital required to start a new household. You aren't buying land from scratch.
And the second pillar was just lower formal housing costs across the board relative to domestic income.
Right. Third, you had prevailing cultural norms that deeply embraced large families as the foundation of social capital and community support.
And the fourth was the economic logic of child labor contributions in a largely rural agricultural economy.
Yes. Children weren't just an expense, they made tangible contributions. The larger the family, the greater the aggregate labor capacity.
But those pillars don't exist in a vacuum. As Jamaica modernized, the foundation shifted. We're all familiar with the demographic transition model.
The DTM, right?
Yeah, the textbook progression where, as a society modernizes, fertility falls. And Jamaica has been pushing aggressively into the later stages of this model.
We've seen the rapid urbanization, the mass movement from rural agricultural centers to Kingston and other urban hubs.
We've seen wider access to education and family planning, plus a critical surge of women anchoring the formal workforce.
But the textbook DTM doesn't fully account for the severity of the sub-replacement drop we are witnessing here. The modernization factors alone just don't explain a contraction this sharp.
Right, which brings us to the core. What's actually driving it?
Well, what's fascinating here is that standard demographic models often fail to capture the nuances of heavily globalized post-colonial economies. If you strictly apply the textbook model, you miss the reality on the ground.
You miss the big picture.
Exactly. To truly decode why the birth rate has plummeted so aggressively, you have to look outside standard demographic variables and analyze two massive, highly volatile sectors: real estate and global migration.
Let's dive right into that real estate aspect, because this is the core argument of the deep dive, the housing affordability trap.
Bricks before babies.
Exactly. The source material frames it perfectly as a bricks before babies scenario. We're looking at a violently widening housing affordability gap.
Land values in urban centers have absolutely surged.
Driven by commercial development and infrastructure projects that displace accessible residential zoning.
And it goes far beyond just the speculative value of the land. The actual construction costs have decoupled from the local economy.
Because of the reliance on imports.
Yes. Jamaica, like many island nations, has a profound vulnerability to global supply chain volatility. There is an almost total reliance on imported construction materials: steel, cement, specialized fixtures.
So when global shipping rates spike, or a supply chain bottlenecks halfway across the world, the cost to build a modest starter home in Kingston skyrockets.
Completely independent of local inflation or wage growth.
Which brings us to the mortgage hurdles.
Mm.
And this is where the math truly breaks down for the domestic population.
Young professionals.
Yeah, you have an entire generation of young professionals executing the prescribed playbook perfectly. They get advanced degrees, enter the formal job market, climb the professional ladder.
Yet they find their domestic earnings are completely incompatible with the strict lending criteria of financial institutions.
Right, the interest rates and required debt-to-income ratios effectively lock them out of the market entirely.
And in housing economics, homeownership is a universally recognized precursor to family formation.
It's the foundation.
Exactly. When you create this massive affordability gap, young adults adapt their timelines, we see a very specific behavioral outcome.
They extend their rental agreements.
They stay in their family homes much longer than previous generations. They delay property acquisition indefinitely.
And the downstream effect of delaying household formation is the direct delay and ultimate reduction of family size.
We categorize this adaptation as demographic caution.
Demographic caution. I love that term. It fundamentally shifts the blame from the individual back to the environment.
It really does.
There's a powerful quote from Dean Jones, the founder of Jamaica Homes, in the source material that cements this point.
Oh, I know the one.
He states, quote, "You cannot lecture people into having children while the foundations of family life remain unstable. Housing affordability, economic opportunity, and long-term security must come first. When people feel confident about building a life in a country, families grow naturally."
It strips away the moralizing tone that usually accompanies these discussions.
Right. Stop telling young people they're selfish for not having kids.
Exactly. When foundational access to secure housing is uncertain, exercising extreme caution is the only rational response. Initiating a large family without guaranteed shelter isn't just risky, it is economically irrational.
And that strict economic rationality heavily influences the evolving structures of the households themselves. Jamaica presents a highly specific socioeconomic reality here.
The female-headed households.
Yes. Historically, the country has maintained an exceptionally high proportion of female-headed households, driven by historical labor practices, migration dynamics, and shifting gender roles.
And analyzing this through an economic lens reveals an intense vulnerability. Single-parent households face severe income volatility.
Especially when childcare responsibilities actively limit that single parent's ability to participate in the labor market.
Right. When one adult is legally and practically responsible for the full spectrum of cost housing, education, healthcare, daily child rearing, the financial calculus of having another child is radically altered.
Layered right on top of that economic friction is the rapid evolution of social norms. Jamaican women today are achieving unprecedented levels of educational attainment and professional independence.
So as they solidify this footing, they naturally prioritize their autonomy and long-term economic stability.
They're running the numbers.
They really are. Declining birth rates here are the perfect, undeniable intersection where strict economic rationality meets modernizing social norms. Women are looking at the cost of infant care versus their earning potential and realizing that having fewer children is the most viable path to maintaining their economic footing.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. You cannot fully analyze Jamaica's demographic turning point without factoring in the massive influence of the world outside its borders.
The diaspora.
Yes, Jamaica has one of the most globally dispersed diasporas relative to its domestic population size anywhere in the world. Massive communities in the UK, the US, Canada, and this external network dramatically distorts the demographic numbers at home.
Historically, outward migration has been viewed as a dual-edged sword that slightly leans positive. It provides employment, generates remittance flows, facilitates international education.
But demographically,
Demographically, it is a harsh filter. It disproportionately extracts the youngest, most highly educated, and most economically active citizens.
right, when a massive cohort of 20-somethings permanently relocates to Toronto or London, it directly hollers out the reproductive age population on the island. Naturally, policymakers are aware of this brain drain, and the standard response is to aggressively encourage return migration, bring back the capital and the expertise.
But the reality of reintegrating into the local landscape is incredibly complex. Diaspora members aren't necessarily returning to build traditional lives. The paper details how they are adopting transnational lifestyles instead.
A transnational lifestyle, what does that look like in practice?
It means a highly successful diaspora family might purchase significant property in Jamaica, maybe as a short-term rental investment or for retirement, but they fiercely maintain their primary residence and their tax base abroad.
Because they have concerns over domestic job prospects, healthcare infrastructure, and the school systems.
Exactly. The modern, highly skilled Jamaican professional is making life decisions on a global macroeconomic scale.
Jamaica isn't just competing with itself. It is locked in a fierce battle for its own citizens against massive global hubs.
An ambitious young engineer or physician is looking at opportunities in Kingston, but they are weighing them directly against immediate offers in London, Toronto, and Dubai.
They're asking, where can I achieve maximum professional advancement and ensure the best outcomes for my family?
And for those contemplating a return, there is a massive professional risk. If domestic labor markets rely heavily on informal networks prioritizing who you know rather than transparent, merit-based hiring returnees view permanent relocation as a career hazard.
If they can't fairly integrate into the local corporate sector, they'll simply keep their talents and their future families abroad. So, synthesizing all of this, you have an environment where the domestic population is systematically priced out of homeownership. Women are rationally calculating the immense financial burden of modern parenthood, and top-tier talent is deciding it's safer to build families overseas.
It's a deeply rooted structural crisis.
So how do governments typically attempt to solve this? We see it globally. They roll out pronatalist policies.
Yes, the standard bureaucratic reflex. Financial incentives explicitly designed to convince the population to produce more children.
Tax benefits, child allowances, direct cash payouts to new parents.
It's a highly visible reaction from governments staring down terrifying census projections. But the Jamaica Homes news article calmly dismantles this approach using overwhelming international evidence.
Because short-term payouts don't offset decades-long costs.
Mathematically, it's absurd. A minor tax break or a $3,000 baby bonus does absolutely nothing to offset the compounding costs of modern housing, private education, and healthcare.
You can't hand a young professional a nominal check and expect them to ignore the reality that a standard 3-bedroom apartment has completely outpaced their earning potential for the next 20 years.
Precisely. If we look at the European models, the contrast is stark. The article highlights countries like France and Sweden, which have maintained relatively stable fertility rates.
And they don't do it with one-off bonuses.
No, Their sustained demographics are the result of comprehensive, deeply integrated social policies, universally accessible childcare, expansive parental leave for both partners, and highly flexible labor markets.
So in Jamaica, dropping isolated cash incentives into a broken system is guaranteed to fail without systemic reform.
Absolutely. And the most glaring root cause brings us right back to the real estate market, which functions as an early warning system for societal confidence.
The segmented market.
Yes, two entirely different realities operating in the same geographic space.
On one level, the market is booming for diaspora investors and tourism-linked developments.
But that booming sector is completely decoupled from the local wage ceiling. Luxurious investment properties flourish, while young domestic families are thoroughly and permanently boxed out of homeownership.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out, the takeaway is absolute. Declining birth rates are not some bizarre anomaly or a generational cultural failing.
They are a downstream symptom.
The mathematical result of a society struggling with housing affordability, non-meritocratic job markets, and a lack of structural support.
I want to return to that core insight from Dean Jones because it truly distills the entire brief into a single truth. If Jamaica wants people to build families here, it must first make it possible to build lives here.
It's so well said.
Demography is about national confidence. If citizens genuinely believe a secure, economically stable future is achievable, families will naturally grow to fill that space.
It's a profound shift in how we interpret the statistics we see every day. Demographics aren't just numbers. They are the loudest alarm bell a society has.
And this raises an important question to leave you with, one that looks past the immediate crisis. Consider this. If demography is destiny, what happens to global innovation and economic expansion in 50 years when the nations that have historically supplied the world's most mobile, highly educated young talent finally age out?
That is a staggering thought.
Take a look at your own city, your own neighborhood, or your own industry. Where are you seeing supposed cultural shifts or generational anomalies that are actually just disguised housing and opportunity crises? Are the people in your community opting out of traditional milestones, or have they simply been priced out of them?
That is the perfect provocative thought to end on. It completely reframes the global talent war we are already seeing today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this breakdown equips you with a sharper, more structural lens to view the headlines.
Keep questioning those surface-level narratives.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.